Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds, where quiet curiosity takes its time and the long echoes of the past are allowed to drift into the room with us. My name is Thomas, and tonight I'd like to invite you into a question that has been quietly waiting in the frozen winds of prehistory. What if humanity had never emerged from the Ice Age, not just as a passing thought, but as a real possibility? A world in which our kind never stepped beyond the flicker of campfires, never planted the first fields, never carved stories into stone. A world where the cold never loosened its grip, and the steppe remained a wilderness of snow, mammoths, and silence. The Ice Age shaped us in ways that are easy to overlook. Firelight became our second sun. Tools sharpened from stone turned into extensions of our hands. And migration, the endless need to follow food, warmth, and safety etched resilience into our very bones. Without those adaptations, it is not clear we would have survived at all. And yet, survival was never guaranteed. For tens of thousands of years, we lived on the narrowest edge, small bands of hunter-gatherers pressing against mile-thick ice sheets that covered much of North America and Eurasia, scavenging what little food the frozen earth would allow. So here is the tension we will hold tonight. If the cold had persisted just a little longer, if the storms had been harsher, if our small tribes had faltered at the wrong moment, then perhaps Earth would have remained a planet of animals and frozen landscapes, untouched by civilization. Settle in with me, if you will. Let the world outside grow quiet. Picture the snow crunching beneath your feet, the dim auroras wavering overhead, and a silence so complete it feels almost eternal. We're going to imagine that silence stretching on into a world without us. And to begin, we'll step into the cold itself, the great freeze that threatened to end us before our story could even begin. The cold was not a passing season. It was not the kind of winter we know, where snow melts away to spring and warmth slowly returns to the soil. This was a winter that gripped the earth for tens of thousands of years, a winter that seemed, at times, as though it might never end. Around 20,000 years ago, our planet stood at the height of what is known as the last glacial maximum. Vast ice sheets stretched across the northern hemisphere like enormous white blankets, their weight pressing continents down, their edges creeping into places where forests and grasslands had once grown. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheet sprawled across millions of square miles, a frozen fortress more than a mile thick in some places. Across the ocean, in Eurasia, another expanse of ice covered Scandinavia, northern Germany, and much of what we now call Russia. Mountains wore glaciers like armor. Valleys were filled with rivers of ice that moved slowly, grinding rock into dust, reshaping the land with every inch of progress. If you could have stood at the edge of one of these ice sheets, you might have heard it creak and crack as it shifted. A deep groan, almost like the earth itself exhaling. The air would have stung your lungs, heavy with cold. Nothing green would have grown at your feet, only tundra stretching endlessly, dotted with tough grasses, mosses, and lichens that clung to life in the frozen soil. And yet, this was the world where early humans fought to survive. Small groups of hunter-gatherers lived at the margins of this icy expanse, moving restlessly, never able to stay in one place for long. Food was scarce, not because the world was empty, but because everything living was locked in its own struggle. Large herds of reindeer, bison, and mammoths roamed the steppe, but following them was dangerous and unpredictable. A failed hunt could mean the difference between survival and death. Imagine, for a moment, the tools in your hands, not polished steel or anything you might find in a modern kitchen. Instead, a sharp-edged flint blade, chipped carefully from stone, a spear tipped with bone, hardened in fire. These were the lifelines of early people. With them, they carved hides into clothing, butchered game, and defended themselves against predators. Fire was not just warmth, it was survival. The flicker of flames against the walls of a shelter was the only thing standing between a fragile body and the lethal cold outside. But even fire had its limits. The Ice Age winds could strip away heat faster than flames could provide it. Shelters had to be built quickly, often from whatever could be found, animal hides stretched over bones, caves chosen for their protection, pits dug into the frozen ground and lined with branches. Each night carried the question, would the cold seep in too deeply? Would the fuel last until morning? This was not a world of abundance. The frozen climate locked away resources. Trees were sparse in many regions, making wood for fuel a precious commodity. Plants that could be gathered for food were limited, short-lived during brief summers, quickly consumed or dried for storage. Water, of course, was everywhere, but frozen, demanding the effort of melting, a simple task that still carried the weight of necessity. Hunter-gatherer bands lived on the edge of collapse. Archaeological evidence suggests that their numbers were small, perhaps only a few tens of thousands of humans across entire continents. Each band might have been only a handful of families, no larger than a few dozen people. In this fragile existence, cooperation was everything. Sharing food, protecting one another during hunts, watching over fires, these were not acts of kindness, but acts of survival. And still, even with all their adaptations, the ice pressed closer. The climate was harsh not only in cold but also in unpredictability. Storms could sweep across the steppes with little warning, blanketing everything in white, erasing paths, disorienting hunters. Winds howled across open plains with nothing to break their strength. Nights were long, and the stars above, though brilliant in their cold clarity, gave no warmth. It is almost impossible, from the comfort of the present, to imagine how relentless such a world must have felt. Each day was an unending negotiation with nature. Each moment carried the weight of risk. A broken spear, a failed fire, an injured hunter. Any of these could end not just an individual life, but the life of an entire band. Now, imagine if this cold had continued. Imagine if the last glacial maximum had not given way to warming, if the ice sheets had refused to retreat. Would humans have endured? Or would the cold have finally won? Perhaps we would have dwindled into obscurity, a brief experiment in survival that never grew beyond scattered camps of firelight in the snow. The earth would have continued, indifferent. The mammoths would have carried on across the tundra, the cave lions would have hunted in the night, and the ice would have kept its silence. Take a moment to picture that silence. A steppe under endless stars, no villages, no cities, no voices, only the sound of wind moving across frozen grasses and the distant crack of ice shifting in the night. We'll stay here for a little while, in that cold, to see what it might have meant for us never to emerge from it. The cold, in truth, was only one face of the danger. Even if our ancestors managed to coax warmth from fire and carve out temporary safety from wind and snow, there was always another threat waiting. Starvation lingered at the edge of every camp. Food was never guaranteed, and famine was a constant shadow. During the last glacial maximum, game animals themselves were stretched thin. Herds of mammoth and bison wandered vast distances in search of grazing grounds that were themselves limited by permafrost and ice. To follow them was to gamble long migrations with no promise of a hunt at the end. Sometimes entire bands would trek for weeks, exhausted and hungry, only to find the herds had already moved on. A failed season could mean empty bellies through the winter, bodies weakened until they could no longer endure the cold. And starvation rarely came alone. Weakness bred vulnerability. Disease, though harder to trace in the archaeological record, would have been inevitable in close quarters. A single infection moving through a small group could devastate it. Unlike today, there were no medicines, no stockpiles of food to wait out an illness. To get sick in the Ice Age was to stand at the edge of a precipice where one stumble might drag the whole group down. The genetic threads of humanity were delicate then, stretched thin across a frozen planet. Modern studies of DNA suggest that our species once passed through what scientists call a bottleneck, a period where numbers dwindled so low that only a small fragment of our potential diversity survived. Some estimates suggest that as few as a few thousand breeding individuals may have carried our lineage through the worst of the Ice Age. Imagine that for a moment, an entire species balanced on numbers smaller than the population of a modern town. Had that thread snapped, the story of humanity might have ended without anyone to remember it. Our tools would have been buried in silt and ice. Our fire pits would have collapsed into ash and soil. Our voices would have gone silent, leaving no echo. Earth would have rolled on without us, and no one would have marked our absence. And as fragile bands of humans struggled, they were never alone in the wilderness. Other predators moved across the snow. Cave lions, larger than any lions we know today, stalked the steppes. Dire wolves, heavier and stronger than modern wolves, hunted in coordinated packs. Short-faced bears, massive towering creatures, could drive even the bravest hunters away from a kill. To compete with these animals was to risk not only the failure of a hunt, but death itself. Even the great mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses were not passive prey. To face one was to enter into a contest with an animal that weighed as much as a truck, that carried tusks like spears, and that could trample a human in an instant. Success in such hunts demanded courage, coordination, and extraordinary luck. A broken bone in the wrong season might mean the end of not only the hunter, but everyone who depended on the meat. So perhaps it is not difficult to imagine another outcome. Picture a winter when the snow comes early, blanketing the ground before food has been stored. The herds are gone, their tracks buried and lost. The hunters grow thin, their strength fading. A child falls ill, and soon the whole camp is weakened. Firewood runs out. The storm does not stop. One by one, the fires flicker out across the steppe. One by one, the voices fall silent. And then there are none. If that had happened, if small tribes had failed to adapt, then the Ice Age would not have been just a chapter of hardship. It would have been the closing of our story. Humanity would have ended as quietly as it began, a species that survived for a while and then slipped away, leaving only bones for the frost to cover. And in our absence, the world would not have mourned. The auroras would still have danced across the sky. The ice sheets would still have groaned and shifted. The mammoths would still have moved, massive and slow, across the frozen plain. Take a moment to imagine that final winter not as a catastrophe marked in stone, not as a disaster anyone remembered, but as a silence that arrived and simply stayed, a silence where no one dreamed of the future because the future itself had ended before it began. This is the edge we once walked, the narrow chance that separated survival from extinction, and it is only by slipping past that edge, barely, that we came to build the world we now know. But let's linger a little longer in the thought. What if we hadn't? What if the silence had claimed us and Earth had moved on? That's where our journey takes us next, into a world without humanity. A planet still locked in ice, still alive, but without its most fragile and unlikely storyteller. Without us, the Ice Age world would have stretched on in silence, vast and unmarked. The ice sheets themselves would have remained the great architects of the land, sculpting mountains, grinding valleys, and pressing down entire regions beneath their crushing weight. Mile after mile of frozen white would have covered much of the northern hemisphere, transforming continents into frozen fortresses. From the northern tip of what we now call Canada down toward the plains of the Midwest, ice would have lain thick and heavy. Across Europe, glaciers would have blanketed Scandinavia and northern Germany, flowing eastward into the heart of Eurasia. These sheets of ice were not still, even if they seemed so from a distance. They creaked, shifted, and inched forward like slow rivers frozen in time. Beneath them, the land was carved into new shapes. moraines of stone and gravel built up at their edges. Rivers of meltwater cut channels that shifted with the seasons, redirecting whole landscapes without notice. To imagine this earth is to imagine a continent half buried in silence, half shaped by restless movement. Where the ice did not reach, tundra and steppe stretched to the horizon. Imagine endless fields of frozen grasses, broken only by the dark silhouettes of hardy shrubs. No smoke rising from campfires. No paths worn down by human feet. Only the tracks of migrating animals pressed into the snow, leading across a wilderness untouched by story or memory. The forests that had survived would have stood uncut, unburned, unaltered. Pines, spruces, and birches would have clustered in the south, spreading into dense and ancient thickets. Every tree would have grown to its full span without the mark of an axe. Fallen trunks would have been left to rot, feeding the soil for the next generation. Wolves would have padded between them, lynxes crouched in shadow, and owls sweeping overhead through the frozen silence. And the rivers they would have run clear, untouched by bridges, dams, or villages built along their banks. Their courses would have shifted naturally, flooding plains in spring, freezing solid in winter, carving deeper valleys year by year. Imagine the Nile, the Danube, the Mississippi, the Yangtze, flowing free in their primeval states, without boats, without settlements, without names, only water moving endlessly toward the sea. But even the seas themselves would not have been familiar. The oceans during the last glacial maximum were lower than they are today, as much as 400 feet lower. So much water was locked away in ice that coastlines were pushed outward, exposing land where now waves roll in. Entire continental shelves lay bare, stretching into vast plains of tundra. Land bridges connected what we now think of as separate worlds. Asia and North America were joined by a wide expanse known as Beringia, a cold steppe where mammoths and bison roamed freely. Britain was not yet an island but part of Europe, connected by a low plain called Doggerland, rich with rivers and wetlands that would one day be swallowed by the sea. Australia was fused with New Guinea and Tasmania, forming a single landmass. Islands we know today would have been peninsulas or high ridges of vast continental extensions. Picture this earth as a single, sprawling canvas of connection. Continents that today are divided by oceans were once stitched together by frozen land. Herds of animals could move across regions we now see as separate continents. A wolf in Siberia could, without encountering any human obstacle, follow prey all the way into what is now Alaska. The seas that separated us had not yet returned. The earth was smaller, more continuous, a world without barriers. And without us, that world would have remained whole. The forests unbroken, the grasslands untrampled, the coastlines unclaimed. Every ecosystem would have unfolded according to its own rhythm, guided only by climate and time. Let's pause here, for just a moment, and imagine standing at the edge of one of those ancient land bridges, a cold wind in your face. To one side, the frozen sea stretching out into the distance. To the other, a horizon of endless grass. In that silence, there are no voices, no maps, no borders, only earth, untouched. Perhaps, in our absence, this is how the planet would have preferred to remain. Whole, cold, balanced in its own vast cycles. But balance is never still for long. The ice would retreat and advance again, following its ancient rhythm. The forests would spread and shrink. Rivers would carve new paths. And through it all, the animals would endure, thriving in a world unpressured by our presence. And so our absence leads us naturally into the next thought. If Earth had carried on without us, which creatures would have inherited the crown of survival? Which lives would have grown brighter in the silence we left behind? That is where we go next, into the kingdom of animals, in a world where they would have ruled alone. In our absence, the animals would have taken the stage fully, not as background, but as the unchallenged rulers of Earth. The Ice Age, harsh as it was, had already sculpted a world of giants, creatures built for cold, for endurance, for survival on open plains and frozen tundra, without humans pressing against them, hunting them, or reshaping their landscapes. These animals might have endured for thousands upon thousands of years longer than they did. Woolly mammoths would still have wandered the northern steppes, their long, shaggy coats stirring in the wind, their tusks curling toward the sky like frozen crescents. These were not creatures of myth, but of muscle and patience, capable of migrating across entire continents in search of grass. Without human hunters, their herds might have thrived, spreading from Siberia through Beringia and into the wide plains of North America, shaping the ecosystems beneath their heavy feet. Wherever mammoths grazed, the land changed, grasses were kept short, shrubs suppressed, pathways carved through the snow. In many ways, mammoths were gardeners of the Ice Age, keeping vast regions open and fertile. Left alone, their influence might have endured, the mammoth steppe stretching on as one of the dominant ecosystems on Earth. Beside them would have stood mastodons, close relatives but browsers rather than grazers. Unlike mammoths, they preferred forests, pulling down branches, stripping bark, and opening woodlands into meadows. With no humans to track them, no spears to pierce their hides, mastodons might have remained common in the forests of North America. Imagine walking, if we had survived to witness it, through an ancient woodland, alive with the groan of trees bending under mastodon tusks, the forest canopy breaking open not for axe or fire, but for the hunger of giants. And not all the rulers of this imagined Earth would have been herbivores. Predators, too, would have flourished in the silence of our absence. The saber-toothed cat's Smilodon, with its thick, muscular build and fangs like ivory daggers, might have continued to prowl the plains of the Americas. Their ambushes would have defined the balance of prey and predator. Packs of dire wolves, larger and heavier than any wolf alive today, would have followed the great herds across continents, their howls rising over the tundra. Even stranger creatures would still have had their chance. The giant ground sloths of South America, lumbering animals that stood as tall as elephants, could have continued to pull branches down with their immense claws. Glyptodons, armored mammals the size of small cars, might still have grazed on grasslands, their domed shells glittering with frost. And in Australia, where human arrival spelled the end of much of the megafauna, giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and thunderbirds might still have walked the red earth, untamed and unchallenged. Without us, extinction would not have vanished entirely. Nature has always shifted. Climate alone would have tested these animals, for the Ice Age was not a single block of time but a rhythm of advance and retreat, ice growing and shrinking with the slow pulse of the planet. Some species would still have faltered as conditions changed, but their fall would have been slower, stretched across millennia, not compressed into centuries by human pressure. Pause here for a moment and imagine the soundscape of such a world. Instead of engines or voices, you would hear the low rumble of mammoths across the horizon, the heavy breath of bison as they pressed through snow, the crack of branches pulled down by mastodons, and then sudden silence broken by the ambush roar of a saber-toothed cat or the chorus of dire wolves on the hunt. This was not a tame world, but a fierce and balanced one, where strength and adaptation alone wrote the rules. Speculation invites us further. If this world had endured without humans, which creatures might have risen to become dominant? Dominance does not always mean intelligence. It can mean number, range, influence on ecosystems. Mammoths would certainly qualify, reshaping landscapes in their wake. Wolves, with their cooperative hunting, might have expanded even further, their packs filling every niche across Eurasia and the Americas. Large herbivores like aurochs, the wild ancestors of cattle, might have roamed in herds so vast they stretched beyond the horizon. But intelligence is a different measure. and it tempts us to wonder, ravens and crows, already brilliant problem solvers, might have flourished in a world of rich animal life, learning new tricks from the opportunities left unguarded by humans. Elephants, in regions spared by climate, might have grown not only in size but in culture, their social bonds deepening across generations. Perhaps given enough time, another lineage of primates, one not tied to us, might have explored fire, tools, or cooperation in new and unexpected ways. Yet the beauty of this exercise is not in imagining replacements for ourselves, but in seeing the richness that might have carried on without us. The world would not have been empty. Far from it. It would have been full, crowded with life, structured by the rhythms of predator and prey, shaped by migrations that stretched across entire continents, and in that fullness, Earth would have thrived, not poorer for our absence, but different, wilder, more ancient. Take a moment to picture a herd of mammoths moving across the steppe, their silhouettes black against the snow. No hunters in their shadow, no stories carved into bone or ivory, no fires waiting in the distance. Only the animals themselves, immense and enduring, the rightful rulers of their age. This was their world before it was ours, and if the cold had claimed us, it might have remained theirs forever. But the absence of humans carries with it another thought, not only the endurance of animals, but the loss of everything we carried with us. Firelight, tools, the beginnings of invention. What happens to a world when its fragile spark of technology goes out? That's where we go next, into the lost inventions that would never have been if we had vanished into the ice. What we carried with us into the Ice Age was not much by the standards of history, but it was everything. In the fragile glow of firelight, in the chipped edges of stone, in the skins stretched across wooden frames, we had begun to build something that no other creature had: the beginnings of technology, the slow emergence of culture. If we had vanished into the ice, all of this would have vanished with us. Imagine a world without stone tools. No sharp flakes struck from flint, no hand axes passed from one generation to another, no points carefully shaped to pierce hide and bone. These were not only weapons, but memory itself. Tools were the record of human thought made physical, the first time imagination left a trace in the material world. To lose them would be to erase the very idea of shaping the environment with intention. Fire, too, would have gone out, at least in the way we carried it. Other creatures knew fire. They saw it in lightning strikes, in burning forests, in the molten heart of volcanoes. But only humans learned to hold it, to keep it alive through the night, to coax sparks into flame when embers had gone cold. Fire was our second sun, a portable star that turned night into day, that drove predators back into shadow, that cooked food into nourishment. Without us, fire would have returned to being an accident of the natural world. Flames would rise only when lightning struck dry brush or when the earth cracked open in volcanic fury. Never again would a small group huddle around a flame of their own making, watching sparks dance upward into the night. Shelters, too, would have been lost. The Ice Age pressed us to experiment: hides stitched together to block the wind, mammoth bones arranged into frames, caves reshaped with firelight and ochre. These were not permanent homes, but they were beginnings. To vanish before they became common was to leave the earth without architecture, without the first tentative attempts to bend space into dwelling. The forests and caves would have remained as they were, untouched, no branches bent by human hands, no walls marked by ochre-painted hands reaching forward in time, and domestication, that long, slow weaving of our lives with those of plants and animals, would never have begun. No dogs emerging from wolf packs to sit by our fires, no wheat bending toward cultivation, no cattle, no goats, no horses. Every species would have remained wild, unaltered by our partnership. Wolves would still hunt only for themselves. Grasses would remain unshaped, never turned into golden seas of grain. The bond between human and nature, complex, fraught, and transformative, would never have existed. So, imagine the nights of this alternate Earth. No flicker of campfire on the tundra, no sparks rising into the sky. Only starlight, cold and sharp in the clear air, and the green and violet ribbons of auroras drifting above. A planet lit only by what the heavens offered: the pale shine of the moon, the steady constellations, the occasional blaze of a comet. Beauty untouched, but also beauty unwitnessed. It is tempting to see this as loss, and in some ways it is. The fragile beginnings of human invention would have been erased, scattered into the soil, forgotten by the earth. But it is also a kind of continuity. The planet without us would not be empty, only unmarked by human thought. Fire would remain in the core of the earth. Tools would remain hidden in the physics of stone, waiting to be struck. Shelters would remain in the embrace of caves and forests. The patterns we discovered would still exist, only no one would have stepped forward to claim them. Pause for a moment and picture the auroras in this world without us. Imagine them shifting across the polar skies, undimmed by city lights, unrecorded in memory, unseen by human eyes. They would still have danced. The stars would still have burned. The Milky Way would still have stretched like a river across the night. But without firelight, without us, they would have been the only lights, carrying their secrets into an endless, unobserved sky. And so the question grows deeper. What would the Earth have become without agriculture, without cities, without the leap from invention to civilization? That is where we travel next, into a world without the Neolithic revolution, where rivers remain wild, fields remain uncultivated, and no civilization ever takes root. Without agriculture, the Earth would have remained a wilderness, a place of unbroken cycles where the rhythms of climate and season alone dictated what grew, what grazed, and what passed away. The Neolithic revolution, that turning point when humans first began to plant seeds intentionally, to pen animals, to stay in one place long enough to watch crops ripen, never arrives in this version of history. And so, rivers remain rivers, fields remain fields, and the quiet, untamed balance of ecosystems continues without interruption. Consider the Nile. In our history, its floodwaters became the lifeblood of one of humanity's earliest civilizations. Each year it rose, spilling rich silt across the floodplain, and people learned to capture that rhythm, to sow wheat and barley, to build granaries and temples on its banks. But without us, the Nile would never have been farmed. It would have flooded and receded as it always had, its marshes filling with reeds, its banks alive with crocodiles and ibis. Hippopotamuses would have lingered in the shallows undisturbed, and the fertile land would have remained a delta for fish and birds, not a foundation for cities. The same is true of the Indus. Instead of becoming the home of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, its valleys would have remained thick with forests, swamps, and wild grasses. Tigers might have prowled its banks. Elephants moved slowly through its thickets. The Tigris and Euphrates, too, would have remained wild, flowing unchecked through marshes and steppe, never hemmed in by canals, never shadowed by ziggurats. They would have carried their waters into the Gulf without having fed the first cities of Sumer, without having written the earliest lines of human history in clay. Without agriculture, there are no granaries, no surpluses, no reason to gather in permanent settlements. Villages never rise, temples never form, governments never emerge. And without those structures, there is no history as we know it, no calendars, no empires, no dynasties. The story of humanity would have remained a flicker of bands moving through forests and plains, never crossing the threshold into civilization. The earth itself, in turn, would have been spared our rearrangements. Imagine the vast prairies of North America never plowed into fields of corn and wheat. Bison herds would still roam in their millions, shaking the ground like thunder. Wetlands in Europe, never drained, would remain vast corridors of reeds and waterfowl, absorbing floods, feeding countless species. The fertile crescent of the Middle East, which became the garden of wheat and barley, would instead still be home to wild grasses, gazelles, onagers, and migrating birds. Its soils intact, its landscapes unbroken. It is worth pausing here to reflect on what agriculture meant, and therefore, what its absence would mean. With agriculture came permanence, homes of stone and mud brick, villages clustered along rivers. With agriculture came writing records of harvests, contracts, prayers to gods of fertility. With agriculture came monuments, economies, hierarchies, and the idea of civilization itself. Without it, all of these dissolve before they ever take form. Perhaps, in this alternate world, the earth breathes easier. The forests remain whole, the rivers unchanneled, the soils unscarred by the weight of ploughs. The air never thickens with smoke from kilns or furnaces, the land never stripped for vast fields of grain. In this silence, ecosystems remain intact, their balance unaltered by human ambition. Picture a wetland at dawn. Instead of fields shaped by human hands, it stretches outward, mist rising from shallow waters, reeds rustling in the wind. Cranes lift their wings in the first light, fish ripple beneath the surface, and predators watch from the shadows. This is the kind of world that might have persisted, a world of continuity, not invention. But there is a paradox here, isn't there? Without agriculture, there is no civilization. But without civilization, there are no pyramids, no epics, no libraries of Alexandria, no maps of the stars. The silence of the rivers is beautiful, yes, but it is also empty of memory. The earth would remain whole, but without witnesses. And so the thought deepens. What happens to the great rhythms of climate, geology, and time when no human hand interferes at all? How would the planet's own cycles continue in our absence? That is where we turn next, into Earth's long timeline without us, a planet still changing, still evolving, but untouched by the brief flicker of civilization. The Earth has always had its own rhythm, a slow pulse, measured not in centuries, but in tens of thousands of years. Long before we appeared, glaciers grew and shrank, seas rose and fell, climates warmed and cooled in great sweeping arcs of time. And in a world without us, that rhythm would have continued undisturbed, a silent metronome beating across the ages. Even without human hands to measure them, the great cycles of the planet would have remained. The tilt of Earth's axis, the slow wobble of its orbit, the shifting of continents on their plates, these were the forces that wrote the ice ages. And they would have gone on writing long after we were gone. Imagine standing on a tundra plain, not for a single moment, but for 10,000 years. Seasons blur, centuries vanish, and still the ice ebbs and flows like a living tide. At the height of the last glacial maximum, ice covers nearly a third of the land. Then, slowly, it pulls back, retreating into the poles, giving space for grasses and forests to spread. Animals follow herds, expanding into new valleys, birds filling the skies, rivers breaking free of their icy chains. And then, in time, the cycle begins again. Cold returns, ice advances once more. This is the heartbeat of the planet, the rhythm of glaciation. Without us, it would have carried on unchanged. There would be no sudden warming from greenhouse gases, no sharp spike in global temperatures, no disruption of the natural timeline. The Earth would follow its slow path, glacial, interglacial, glacial again, with the patience of a clock that does not hurry. Volcanoes would still rise and fall, throwing ash into the sky, cooling climates for a season or two. Mountains would still erode, their peaks breaking down grain by grain, feeding rivers with sediment. Earthquakes would still rattle fault lines, shifting coastlines by inches that only become miles across the span of millennia. the continents themselves would continue their slow drift, carrying with them the ecosystems that adapted to each new position on the globe. Without an industrial revolution, the air would remain clear of coal smoke and carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. The oceans would remain unacidified, their chemistry shaped only by natural exchanges of gas and water. Coral reefs would still rise and fall in their ancient patterns, unthreatened by warming seas. Forests would stretch and shrink only as climate dictated, not by axes or fire. Pause here, if you will, and picture the skies. No contrails from plains, no haze of pollution, only clouds drifting in natural formations, sculpted by winds alone. At night, the stars would burn with a clarity we have almost forgotten, every constellation sharp, every nebula visible as a faint brush of light. For millions of years, this is what the earth would have known. Skies unbroken, waters untainted, land following the cycles of sun and ice. There is a strange beauty in imagining this version of the planet, a place where nothing interrupts the slow unfolding of geological time. Yet it is also humbling, for in this vision, Earth reminds us that we were never necessary to its story. It has always had its own path, its own rhythm. We were only ever one of its many experiments. Perhaps the ice would still retreat again, as it has before. Perhaps, without us, the planet would by now be in a warmer phase, grasslands stretching where glaciers once stood, forests spreading into new territories. Or perhaps the cold would still linger, holding Earth in its white grip a little longer. Either way, it would not matter to the planet itself, only to us. And if we are not here, then even that question dissolves into silence. The Earth endures. With or without our witness, it continues on its long and patient path. And so, in imagining this Earth of natural balance, we come next to the question of harmony itself. What would planetary balance mean in our absence? A world cooler, untouched by our industry, ruled only by its ancient cycles. That is where we go next, into the thought of a planet whole and unbroken, where balance belongs only to the Earth itself. In our absence, the Earth would have remained tuned to its own deep rhythm, never shaken out of balance by the fever of industry. No carbon emissions rising invisibly into the air, no sudden thickening of the atmosphere, no rapid shifts of temperature, only the slow turning of the planet's natural cycles, unfolding across tens of thousands of years. The ice ages themselves are a testament to this rhythm. They were not singular events but repeating patterns, sculpted by the Earth's orbit around the Sun. A slight tilt in the axis, a subtle stretching of the orbit, a change in how sunlight fell across the hemispheres and ice advanced or retreated. Over and over again, the glaciers grew like continents of their own, and then melted back into the sea. Without us, that rhythm would have gone on unbroken, a planetary tide too slow for any creature to command. Imagine the Earth today without human influence. The climate would likely be cooler than the one we know. Some scientists suggest that, left to itself, the planet might even have been drifting back toward another glacial maximum, its ice sheets preparing once more to spread across the northern continents. Instead of cities, highways, and farmland, we might see vast plains of tundra, herds of mammoths grazing under cold skies, wolves hunting in the distance. Or perhaps, in another turn of the cycle, the ice would still be retreating, giving way to greener lands, forests pushing northward, rivers swelling with meltwater. In that world, the planet would not have been locked in permanent frost, but would have breathed more freely between cold and warmth, each era lasting thousands of years, never rushed, never forced. Pause here for a moment and try to picture this slower Earth, seasons unfolding as they always had, each summer and winter flowing into the next, undisturbed by factories or engines. Imagine standing on a hillside where grasses ripple in the wind, and knowing that those grasses have not been cut, burned, or ploughed for 10,000 years. Imagine breathing air untouched by exhaust, only the scent of soil, water, and pine. It is tempting to see such a world as purer, perhaps even healthier. Without us, forests would be denser, oceans clearer, coral reefs more radiant, animal migrations unbroken. The carbon locked in coal and oil would remain buried beneath the ground, waiting in darkness, never awakened into smoke. The balance of carbon and oxygen, nitrogen and water would remain set by volcanoes, oceans, and forests, not altered by the hands of a single species. Yet balance is not a stillness. Even in our absence, the earth would not be frozen in perfection. It would still shift, still surprise. A volcanic eruption could darken skies for years. An asteroid could strike, as it did for the dinosaurs. Forests could burn from lightning. Grasslands could dry in drought. Balance in this sense does not mean peace, but continuity, the long story of change unfolding without interruption. Speculation invites us further. If the Earth had followed its cycles without us, would we now be entering another deep freeze? Would the glaciers be pressing forward again, covering Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia under white walls of ice? Perhaps. Or perhaps the warmth of this interglacial would have lingered longer, allowing forests to climb further north, allowing wetlands to spread across new valleys. In either case, the change would be slow, stretched across millennia. No sudden spike, no rapid warming, no frantic scramble of ecosystems pushed to adapt within a single century. Only the patient transformations that life has always endured, and in that patience, perhaps the Earth would have found its truest balance. A planet not driven toward fever, not shaken from its natural rhythm, but simply breathing in and out across the ages. Take one more moment here and imagine that breath. The glaciers sighing forward, the forests exhaling oxygen into the sky, the oceans inhaling carbon and releasing it again with the tides. A planetary respiration that has gone on for billions of years and would have continued, unchanged, without us. It is humbling, is it not, to see ourselves not as the keepers of balance, but as the disturbance of it. To recognize that the Earth was already whole, already alive in its rhythms, before we ever struck flint to fire. And so, in this imagined Earth without us, balance itself becomes the story a world cooler, slower, patient. But this balance also means something else. The monuments of civilization, the cultures and histories we built, would never have existed. The silence of rivers without cities leads us naturally to the next thought. The civilizations that were never born, the voices that never rose. That is where we go next, into the lost civilizations that never were, and the silence they leave behind. The story of civilization, as we know it, begins with permanence, with agriculture, with settlement, with the slow gathering of generations in one place long enough to leave a mark. In our absence, that permanence never comes. The rivers remain wild, the plains unplanted, and the civilizations that would have risen from them dissolve into silence before they are ever imagined. Picture the Nile once more, not as the cradle of Egypt, but as a river forever untamed. Along its banks, there are no fields of barley, no temples rising from stone, no pyramids pointing skyward. The great tombs of Giza, the Valley of the Kings, the hieroglyphs carved in stone, none of it exists. Instead, reeds grow thick along the water's edge, herons and ibises gather at dawn, and crocodiles bask in the shallows. The only monuments are the cliffs themselves, carved by wind and water, their silence unbroken by chisels or prayers. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates lies quiet. No ziggurats climb toward the heavens, no cities hum with trade and law. Uruk, Babylon never built, the stories of Gilgamesh never told. The wheel never carved from wood, the first laws never inscribed in clay. Instead, marshlands spread unbroken, flocks of birds rising in waves, rivers flooding freely in spring. Civilization never takes root in the fertile crescent. The crescent remains wild. The Indus Valley, too, would be silent. No brick cities with straight streets, no great baths, no weights and measures marking trade. The valley's forests would remain whole, alive with elephants and tigers, rivers coursing untamed through their floodplains. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, with their carefully planned streets, would be no more than imagination never realized. And across the seas, the Americas remain untouched. There is no Maya carving glyphs into stone, no temples at Tikal, no pyramids at Teotihuacan, no Inca terraces climbing the Andes, no roads stretched across mountains. The great city of Cusco never rises. Machu Picchu remains an unnamed ridge in the clouds. Instead, condors soar undisturbed, llamas graze freely, and the Andes echo only with wind and rain. China, too, remains unformed. The Yellow River floods each year without walls to contain it, spreading silt across plains that never see rice or millet planted in rows. There are no dynasties, no great wall, no terracotta army buried in silence. The dragon remains only an animal of myth, never transformed into a symbol of empire. The forests of the Yangtze remain deep and uncut, the mountains untraced by calligraphy. And in Europe, there are no Roman roads stretching like veins across the land, no aqueducts carrying water to cities, no Colosseum rising in stone. Rome itself never rises, never falls. The legions never march, the empire never spreads. The myths of Greece remain unspoken, the philosophies of Athens never written. The Parthenon remains a hill of stone, not a temple. The Acropolis never crowned. Pause here and let the silence settle. Imagine the world without monuments, without libraries, without written history. The pyramids never lift their sharp silhouettes into the desert sky. The Mayan temples never pierce the canopy of jungle. The Great Wall never snakes across mountains. Stonehenge remains a circle of unshaped boulders, scattered by glaciers and left unarranged. Without civilization, there is no history as we know it. No scrolls, no chronicles, no archives of empires rising and falling. The memory of Earth would remain unwritten, carried only in the genes of animals, in the patterns of migration, in the sediments of rivers. The silence of history is not empty, but it is different, a silence without narrative, without record, without voice. Speculation asks us gently, what does it mean for history never to have been written? What is a world without memory? Perhaps it is a kind of innocence, a planet without scars, without conquest, without monuments to ambition. Or perhaps it is a kind of loneliness, a world full of beauty but without stories to give that beauty shape. Take a moment to picture the night sky above such a world. No astronomers charting constellations, no poets giving names to stars, no calendars measuring solstices. Only the stars themselves, burning with the same fire they always have, their light crossing the void unnoticed, unrecorded. The sky becomes not a map of myth but simply what it is, a scattering of fire across infinity. This is the earth without civilizations, rivers unbounded, monuments unbuilt, languages unspoken. It is a silence deeper than the silence of wilderness, because it is the silence of stories never told. And yet, into that silence creeps another question. If we had not been here to speak, could another have spoken in our place? Could another intelligence, born of Earth's vast diversity, have risen to claim the role of storyteller? That is where we go next, into the echoes of myth and speculation, into the possibility of other civilizations that might have emerged in our absence. If we had not risen, if the fragile thread of our story had been cut beneath the ice, would another voice have eventually emerged? Or would the earth have remained forever without storytellers, without chroniclers of its long unfolding drama? It is a question that touches both science and myth, both evolution and imagination. And perhaps the best way to approach it is to wander slowly through the possibilities, pausing with each one and letting the thought breathe. The first candidates are, of course, those closest to us, the others who walked the earth beside us, cousins in the great family of hominins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others whose names we may never know, who carried their own sparks of intelligence into the Ice Age. They were not so different from us. Neanderthals painted caves, buried their dead, shaped tools with care. Denisovans left behind only fragments of bone and teeth, but they too were survivors of cold and hardship, their genes echoing faintly in us even now. If we had fallen, could one of them have stepped into our place? Could Neanderthals, with their broad frames and quiet strength, have endured long enough to build cultures of their own? Some evidence suggests they had the capacity for language, for art, perhaps even for symbolic thought. Imagine a Europe where Neanderthals thrive alone, their cave paintings growing more intricate across millennia, their songs echoing in valleys where no human voices ever sound. Their civilizations might not have looked like ours. No skyscrapers, perhaps no pyramids, but tools, fires, rituals, yes, these could have endured, expanded, deepened. Or perhaps Denisovans, inhabiting the mountains of Asia, would have found their way into greater complexity. They lived at high altitudes, adapted to thin air, resilient to the cold. Could they have spread further, discovered agriculture in valleys we never touched, shaped myths around the mountains that nurtured them? It is tempting to imagine a world where Denisovans become the storytellers of Earth, their legends carved into cliffs, their societies growing in directions we can scarcely guess. And beyond the hominins, we might wonder, could another species altogether have stepped into the role of culture bearer? Intelligence has flared in many lineages. The Earth has never been stingy with experiments. Consider dolphins, moving through the oceans with minds already rich in communication. Their whistles and clicks are complex, layered, perhaps even a language in their own right. They live in societies, cooperate in hunts, pass knowledge across generations. Without us, might they have grown further? Could they have developed technologies of their own, not of stone or fire, but of sound and movement? A civilization of the sea, invisible to land, but thriving in currents and coastlines? Or consider corvids, ravens, crows, magpies. Even now, they solve puzzles, recognize faces, use tools. Their intelligence is undeniable, their adaptability remarkable. Left alone for tens of thousands of years, could they have grown more? Imagine a future where flocks of ravens pass not only stories but traditions, trading shiny objects across vast distances, weaving networks of exchange. Not cities of stone, but cultures carried on wings. Elephants too might have found a path. Their memories stretch across lifetimes. Their grief for the dead is deep, their social bonds strong. In Africa and Asia, herds could have become the centers of continuity. Oral traditions passed not by words but by gestures, rituals, and long migrations. A civilization not built of walls but of paths, not written in ink but carried in memory across generations. Even octopuses, strange and solitary, offer a glimpse of possibility. Their intelligence is alien, their problem-solving remarkable. In a different ocean, in a different time, could they have become the architects of coral or the shapers of shells? It is speculative, yes, but speculation is the gift of imagining what might have been. Pause for a moment with each of these visions. Neanderthals lighting fires in caves, dolphins weaving soundscapes in the deep, ravens trading across the skies, elephants shaping memory into tradition. None of them certain, none of them inevitable, but all of them possible. And then there are the myths, the echoes of human imagination that might themselves be whispers of what could have been. Stories of talking animals, trickster ravens, dolphin messengers, elephant sages, these appear across cultures, across time. Could they be more than just stories? Could they be hints of the potential intelligence we sensed in the beings around us? The recognition that other creatures stood closer to thought than we often admit. Speculation also invites a longer vision. Suppose Earth remained without us for another million years. Evolution does not stand still. What new forms might intelligence take in that time? Could birds, with their agility and adaptability, evolve minds even sharper than they already possess? Could marine mammals, protected in the oceans, grow cultures vast and enduring? Could an entirely new lineage arise, one we cannot yet imagine, carrying the torch of awareness into a world we never saw? Perhaps Earth is destined always to have storytellers, even if not us. Perhaps consciousness is a spark that reappears, again and again, in different vessels, shaped by different circumstances. Or perhaps we were the rare accident, the unlikely flicker, and without us the planet would have remained forever without voice. There is no answer, only wonder. But in this wondering, we find something profound. Civilization, as we built it, is only one path. There might have been others, softer, stranger, less visible. Civilizations of memory, of sound, of migration, of flight. Civilizations without stone, without fire, without pyramids. Civilizations that might not leave monuments, but still carry meaning. And so the silence we imagined is not absolute. It is filled with possibility, with echoes of what could have been. From here, our thoughts move naturally onward. If animals might have become the heirs of intelligence, what would that world look like? What forms might their societies take, if left to grow in our absence? That is where we go next, into the realm of animal engineers, into speculative visions of what other civilizations might have built, had the Earth been theirs alone. If we step into this vision, an Earth without us, the question becomes not only which animals might survive, but which might create. Which creatures might carry forward the hidden seeds of invention, shaping the world in ways not of stone and steel, but of memory, of sound, of movement. These are the animal engineers, the ones who even now hint at possibilities we rarely allow ourselves to imagine. Let us begin in the oceans, with the dolphins. Already, they show signs of complexity that rival our own beginnings. Their communication is layered whistles, clicks, body language, each carrying nuance. Some researchers suggest their calls function almost like names, identities carried in sound. They teach one another hunting strategies, pass skills between generations, cooperate in ways that require planning and trust. In our absence, could such behaviors deepen? Imagine a pod of dolphins, not only hunting fish, but developing ritualized ways of marking territory, of recording identity, not in writing but in soundscapes woven across the sea. Entire cultural patterns might emerge, different in each ocean, like dialects that grow into traditions. The sea itself could become their library, every cove and current carrying echoes of stories told in clicks and whistles. They might even develop tools of their own. Already, some dolphins use sponges to protect their snouts while foraging. Left alone for millennia, such behaviors could spread, refine, evolve. Perhaps they would learn to shape shells, to move rocks, to build structures in coral reefs. A civilization of sound and coral not visible to land, but rich and enduring beneath the waves. From water, we move to the land, to the elephants. Their intelligence is vast, their memory astonishing. They mourn their dead, revisiting the bones of lost kin, lingering in silence as if in ritual. Their social bonds are strong, their migrations long, guided by knowledge passed down through generations. Without humans to threaten them, might they have become keepers of culture? Picture herds of elephants moving across Africa, their paths not random but deliberate, tracing the same routes year after year, decade after decade, until those paths themselves become monuments in visible cities written across the landscape in memory. Knowledge of waterholes, safe valleys, places of danger, all carried forward not in stone, but in the minds of matriarchs. What if, over tens of thousands of years, such memory deepened into tradition, into a kind of oral history carried not by words but by behavior, gesture, ritual? Perhaps they might have shaped tools too. They already move logs, strip bark, use branches to swat flies. With no human competition, could they have learned to arrange structures, to build shelters, to carve earth into patterns? Imagine elephant societies where rivers are redirected with logs, where clearings are arranged for gatherings, where entire landscapes are shaped by slow, deliberate intention. A civilization not of architecture, but of ecology. Now lift your gaze to the skies, where the corvids, crows, ravens, magpies already show glimmers of invention. They solve puzzles, bend wires into hooks, remember human faces for years. They cache food in secret places, remembering each hiding spot with precision. Some even drop nuts onto roads so that cars will crack them open, then swoop down when the light turns red. If such intelligence thrives without us, what might it become? Imagine flocks of ravens carrying not only food but objects of value, trading across distances, forming alliances. Bright stones, shells, feathers exchanged like currency. Their nests might grow more elaborate, decorated not just for display but to signal identity, belonging, wealth. Over time, such signals could form the basis of culture, of ritual, of shared meaning. A raven civilization would not build pyramids, but it might build traditions, carried on wings from one generation to the next. And then, below the waves once more, there are the octopuses, solitary, elusive, yet brilliant. Their nervous systems are unlike ours, their intelligence distributed throughout their bodies. They open jars, solve mazes, escape aquariums with uncanny precision. Already, they are tool users, carrying coconut shells as portable shelters. What might another million years bring? Picture reefs where octopuses arrange shells in patterns, not only for defense but for display. Imagine caves where they leave marks, ink stains or shell mosaics, as signals to others. Could they have become the artists of the ocean, leaving behind not words but designs, abstract and mysterious, messages in geometry and color? Their lives are short now, but what if evolution gifted them longer spans? What if a lineage of octopuses gained lifespans of decades, allowing culture to pass, knowledge to accumulate? In time, they might become a civilization hidden in the deep, unrecognizable but no less real. Pause with each of these visions: dolphins weaving soundscapes, elephants shaping landscapes, ravens building networks of trade, octopuses leaving mosaics of shells in the sea. Each represents a different possibility, a different path for intelligence. None would look like ours, yet each would carry meaning, purpose, continuity. And perhaps this is the deeper thought, that civilization itself is not one thing, not a fixed pattern of cities and monuments, but a flowering of intelligence in many forms. We built ours from fire and stone, but others might build theirs from sound, memory, wings, or water. Speculation opens further still. Could tool use spread among species we overlook? Could sea otters, already cracking shells with stones, pass that skill forward until it becomes tradition? Could parrots, with their mimicry and play, develop complex communication rivaling language? Could wolves, in their packs, evolve social structures even more intricate than our own? It is not certain, but it is possible, and possibility is enough for wonder. So when we imagine Earth without us, we need not imagine a silence absolute. We can imagine a world where intelligence still grows, still adapts, still finds ways to shape itself into culture. Different, yes. Strange, perhaps. but no less beautiful. And from this thought, we drift naturally onward from the engineers of the animal world into the world they might have built. What would such civilizations look like if they had been given the time to grow? That is where we go next, into the world reimagined, where intelligence wears different forms and civilization takes on shapes we have never seen. Let us step now into a vision that belongs wholly to imagination, but one rooted in the seeds already present in nature. If humanity had ended in the Ice Age, if our fire had gone out beneath the glaciers, what forms of civilization might have bloomed in our place? Not stone pyramids or iron towers, but cities of coral, networks of trade among birds, societies built from memory and migration. Picture first the oceans, the vast blue kingdoms that already cover most of the earth. Without us, coral reefs would have flourished longer, unbleached, uninterrupted. In their branching shapes, already intricate as cathedrals, intelligent beings of the sea might have found both home and canvas. Dolphins, octopuses, or even fish species we overlook today could have made reefs into centers of culture. Imagine coral structures deliberately tended, extended, arranged not only by natural growth but by intention. Walls of color marking boundaries, spirals and circles telling stories visible only beneath the waves. A city not of stone but of living tissue, glowing with light, shifting with current. A civilization written in biology itself. From the ocean, let us rise to the land, where elephants might have become the architects of memory. Their societies already revolve around matriarchs, keepers of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Without us, their numbers might have spread, their cultures deepened. Imagine herds gathering not only for migration, but for great councils, meeting in valleys where generations of elephants return century after century. There, they could have performed rituals of remembrance, mapping the land in their minds, creating oral traditions that last not just lifetimes but eras. In such a world, knowledge would not be carved into tablets or stone, but carried alive in the minds of matriarchs, a civilization of continuity and remembrance, where wisdom is the true architecture. Look upward now, to the skies, where corvids, ravens, crows, magpies might have formed their own networks. Already they recognize one another, solve problems, and exchange objects of value. Imagine a world where ravens trade across great distances, carrying shiny stones or shells, not only for play, but as tokens of exchange. Over centuries, such exchanges could evolve into economies, their rules known and respected across flocks. A raven city would not be of stone or brick, but of gathering places, cliffs and trees where flocks convene to trade, to share, to perform rituals. Their monuments would be nests adorned with treasures, signals of identity, of wealth, of history. Their culture would live in flight paths, invisible threads weaving continents together, and in the deep, in places hidden from human eyes, octopuses might have built worlds beyond imagination. With their flexible bodies and clever arms, they might have created mosaics of shells across the ocean floor, patterns serving as language, as art, as markers of territory. They might have cultivated reefs like gardens, arranging shells not just for defense but for beauty, for meaning. A society of octopuses could have been fluid, shifting, but still rich, their intelligence expressed not in permanence, but in ephemeral works that bloom and vanish, like ink clouds fading in the sea. Pause here, and notice how each of these civilizations does not look like ours. None builds skyscrapers, none forges steel, none sends fire into the sky. And yet each is a form of culture, a way of shaping the world through thought, through intention, through shared meaning. Civilization, after all, is not about the material alone. It is about the continuity of intelligence across generations. Perhaps this is the deeper reflection. Intelligence is not a human invention, but a survival strategy the Earth has tested many times. It emerges in different forms, in different bodies, under different pressures. For us, it took the shape of language, tools, and fire. For others, it might take the shape of memory, sound, or flight. Intelligence is the universe's way of exploring itself, and Earth is the stage on which those experiments play out. Speculation carries us further. Imagine an Earth in which several intelligent lineages rose side by side, dolphins weaving sound cities in the oceans, elephants shaping landscapes with memory and ritual, ravens establishing trade routes across continents, octopuses creating art in the deep. A planet not ruled by one species, but shared among many civilizations, each thriving in its own sphere, each shaping the Earth in ways we cannot fully imagine. Would such civilizations ever meet? Would they recognize one another as kin of thought? Could a raven, watching dolphins leap from the sea, ever understand that those whistles and clicks are stories? Could an elephant, seeing octopuses arrange shells in spirals, recognize that meaning lies in those shapes? Perhaps, across time, such species might develop ways of acknowledging one another, not through language, but through recognition, through shared awareness that they are not alone in thought. And what of myth in such a world? For even animals, we might imagine, could weave stories not written, but told in ritual, in pattern, in sound. Elephants might tell of great migrations past, of ancestors who found water in times of drought. Ravens might pass legends of storms and treasures, carried across skies for generations. Dolphins might sing myths of the deep, of creatures unseen by land, and octopuses might inscribe their myths in shells, patterns repeating across centuries, their meaning known only to those who dwell in the dark. Take a moment to feel the strangeness and the beauty of this vision. A world where intelligence blossoms in forms beyond our own, where civilizations exist not as mirrors of humanity, but as new expressions of Earth's imagination. And then, consider the silence of our own absence. Without us, the Earth might have been spared many scars. But without us, it might also have been spared many stories. Intelligence in other forms might have grown, yes, but would it have reached for the stars? Would it have asked questions of the cosmos? Would it have left echoes as vast as pyramids, libraries, telescopes, spacecraft? That question leads us gently onward. For in a world without us, the skies themselves remain untouched, unexplored, their mysteries left wholly to themselves. And so our path takes us next into the heavens above such a world, into Earth's skies without us, and the unbroken wonder they would hold. Look upward now, into a sky that has never been charted, never mapped, never measured. In our absence, there are no telescopes turning their glass to the heavens, no astronomers drawing constellations, no calendars carved from the motions of stars. The sky remains what it has always been, an ocean of light, vast, unbroken, beyond interpretation. Without us, the moon circles silently above, its phases unnoticed. No eyes record the waxing crescent, no rituals mark the full glow, no myths are born of its shadowed face. It is simply there, a pale companion drifting across the sky, casting light on ice and tundra, reflecting the sun's fire to a planet that has no words for night or day. The aurora borealis becomes the dominant wonder of the north, and the aurora australis of the south. Curtains of green and violet shimmer across polar skies, unseen by human eyes but witnessed, perhaps by wolves, by mammoths, by flocks of migrating birds. To them, the lights are not symbols, not omens, not mysteries to decode. They are simply beauty, woven into the sky by the sun and Earth's magnetic field, silent dances of charged particles in the high atmosphere. Imagine standing beneath such a sky, not as a human, but as the Earth itself. No cities casting light upward, no haze of pollution dimming the stars. The Milky Way stretches brilliant across the night, a river of fire so clear it feels close enough to touch. Every star, every cluster, every nebula glows in sharp detail. What we struggle to see now through telescopes and cameras would have been visible to any eye that could lift and gaze, had such an eye existed. There are no constellations, no Orion or Ursa Major, no myths to bind stars into stories. The patterns are there. Of course, Hunter, Bear, Twins, Scorpion, but they have no names, no tales. The stars remain what they truly are, ancient furnaces of light, burning in silence, indifferent to the absence of observers. And the planets, too, wander unnoticed. Venus gleams in the twilight, brighter than any star. Jupiter and Saturn rise, their brilliance unmatched. But no one marks their paths. No one sees their retrograde dance across the sky. Mars glows faintly red, unremarked, unmeasured. To us, they are the stepping stones of astronomy, the hints that led us to understand gravity, motion, the vastness of space. Without us, they are only points of light among many, unheeded, unstudied. The sun rises and sets each day, not as a deity, not as a source of time, but as simple warmth and light. No calendars divide the year, no solstice is celebrated, no equinox marked. Yet the Earth's cycles go on as they always have, the tilt of the axis bringing seasons, the orbit bringing years. The rhythm of light and dark, summer and winter, endures without witness. Now pause, and let yourself feel the scale of this silence. The entire cosmos, galaxies, stars, planets, comets, nebulae, all of it continues without being named, without being known. The Andromeda galaxy still shines faintly to the eye, 2.5 million light-years away, its light falling on a planet that does not notice. Comets still pass close, their tails blazing against the dark, but no eyes trace their arcs, no hands carve their appearances into stone. Even eclipses go unrecorded. The moon passes in front of the sun, shadow sweeping across tundra and forest, plunging land into sudden darkness. Animals stir, unsettled, then continue their lives when the light returns. But there are no myths of dragons devouring the sun, no rituals of fire and noise to scare them away. The eclipse is only shadow and silence, not omen or story. The night sky is thus both more and less, more brilliant, more unbroken, more filled with light than we know it today, but also less storied, less interpreted, less imbued with meaning. Without us, the cosmos remains itself magnificent, infinite, unknowable, and perhaps that is its truest form. Perhaps stars are not meant to be named, nor planets mapped, nor galaxies classified. Perhaps their beauty lies precisely in their indifference. We have always sought to know, to measure, to explain. But without us, there is only being, a sky that is not a story, but a presence. Speculation invites us to linger. What if another species, in time, had lifted its gaze? Would elephants have marked the phases of the moon? Would ravens have recognized patterns in the stars, carrying them in memory across migrations? Would dolphins, surfacing beneath night skies, have sensed the lights above as kin to the songs they wove below? It is not impossible. Intelligence, as we have seen, can blossom in many forms, and with intelligence comes curiosity, the restless urge to look beyond. Perhaps one day another species might have sought meaning in the sky. But without us, it would not have happened yet. So, imagine now an Earth where the sky remains untold, unmeasured, unclaimed. A sky filled with auroras and stars, with planets and comets, with galaxies beyond number. A sky that is pure presence, a cosmos waiting, patient, untouched. And from that sky, our thoughts turn naturally downward to the earth itself. For while the heavens remain unmeasured, The land too follows its own unbroken paths, migrations, cycles, predator and prey. That is where we travel next, into a world of nature untouched, where life continues in its fullness, unbroken by our hands. Picture for a moment a world where every horizon is alive with movement, herds stretching from one edge of sight to the other, rivers darkened by the passage of animals, skies filled with wings in uncountable numbers. This is Earth untouched, a planet whose migrations and rhythms continue without interruption, without cities, without fences, without roads. Across the northern hemisphere, the caribou still move, as they always have, their migrations among the longest of any land animal. Vast herds sweep across tundra and boreal forest, guided by instinct older than memory. They follow the thawing of ice, the greening of mosses, the cycles of seasons. There are no pipelines in their way, no railroads, no settlements to fragment their paths. Their journeys are whole, complete, echoing across thousands of miles. Imagine standing on that tundra and seeing not dozens, not hundreds, but hundreds of thousands of caribou passing, hooves pounding like distant thunder, the earth itself trembling with life. To the west, across the plains of North America, the bison continue their ancient journeys. Not the scattered herds we know today, reduced to fragments of what once was, but entire continents alive with their presence. Tens of millions roaming from Mexico to Canada, shaping grasslands with their grazing, their movements carving ecosystems into balance. Wolves follow, as they always have, their hunts keeping herds strong, ensuring the cycle of predator and prey endures unbroken. The prairie becomes an ocean of life, grass bending like waves, herds moving like currents, wolves like shadows at the edges. And in Africa, the great wildebeest migrations thunder across the Serengeti. Without us, there are no reserves, no safaris, no interference. The herds simply move, as they always would, millions of animals following rains and rivers, chased by lions, stalked by crocodiles. It is the pure theatre of survival, predator and prey locked in balance, neither overwhelming the other, both ensuring the other's strength. The land is alive with movement, each creature a part of a story that needs no storyteller. Look upward, and the skies themselves are filled with wings. Passenger pigeons extinct in our world still darken the heavens with their flocks, billions strong, their migrations stretching across continents. Their passing turns day into dusk, their numbers so vast that branches break beneath their weight. And not just pigeons. Cranes, geese, storks, all moving along, flyways that span the globe, uninterrupted, unchallenged, free. The seas, too, are alive with migration. Whales follow ancient routes across oceans, their songs unbroken by the drone of ships. Blue whales, the largest creatures ever to live, move through waters filled with krill, their voices echoing for hundreds of miles. Salmon still surge upriver by the millions, feeding forests and bears alike, their sacrifice fueling entire ecosystems. Leatherback turtles cross oceans, returning always to the same beaches, unbothered by lights or nets. The sea is a road, a highway of life, each current carrying travelers who know its paths. This is the earth as it might have been self-contained, self-sufficient, self-sustaining. Predator and prey cycles unbroken. Wolves thinning caribou herds, lions chasing wildebeest, orcas hunting seals. Each death feeds life. Each chase strengthens both hunter and hunted. Without us, the balance is not perfect, but it is whole, shaped by the long patience of evolution. Pause for a moment and breathe in the scale of it. A world where no highways cut across migration routes, no dams block salmon rivers, no walls or fences divide grasslands. Movement is the architecture of the earth. Migration, the rhythm of its pulse. It is a wilderness so complete that our modern imagination can scarcely hold it. Speculation leads us further. What if, in our absence, some migrations had grown even greater? Could mammoths still roam the steppes of Eurasia, moving in herds across landscapes of grass and snow? Could giant ground sloths still pull leaves from South American trees, their massive bodies shaping forests? Could saber-toothed cats still stalk plains, keeping megafauna herds sharp and alert? Without us, extinctions might have come more slowly, more naturally, allowing Ice Age giants to persist for thousands, even tens of thousands, of years longer. And what of the smaller rhythms, the unseen migrations? Insects rising by the billions in summer swarms, feeding birds and fish. Plankton drifting with currents, their numbers waxing and waning with the seasons. Butterflies crossing continents, generations upon generations completing a journey begun long before. Even these smallest lives are part of the larger cycle, threads woven into the fabric of wilderness. In such a world, the earth is not static, not silent, but alive in every direction. Forests expand and retreat with climate shifts. Rivers flood and carve new paths. Mountains erode, seas rise and fall. And through it all, life adapts, moves, migrates. The absence of humans does not mean stillness. It means fullness, a wilderness complete in itself, a system that balances, breaks, and renews without interference. It is humbling to imagine, for our presence, for all its brilliance and ingenuity, has fractured these rhythms. We broke the migrations, hunted the herds, dammed the rivers, darkened the skies. Yet in their original form, they show us what Earth was: a self-sustained wilderness, flowing without end. Perhaps there is a lesson in this vision, that life itself is civilization, that migration is its architecture, that predator and prey are its laws. Our cities are temporary, our monuments fragile, but the wilderness was, and could have remained, eternal. And so from this earth untouched, our thoughts turn naturally onward. For if the land and its cycles remain whole without us, what of the planet itself? What of its climate, its geology, its long rhythms of time? That is where we go next, into the deep story of Earth's balance without us, its climate and geology unfolding in their own patient way. The story of Earth is written not only in forests and rivers, but in stone and ice, in the slow shifting of climates and the patient work of geology. In our absence, these rhythms continue as they always have, unhurried, untouched, immense in scale. There is no Anthropocene here, no epoch defined by the marks of one species. Instead, the Holocene carries forward as a continuation of the Pleistocene, a gentle interglacial, a breath of warmth between ages of ice. Without us, the Earth's balance remains its own. Carbon is exchanged between atmosphere, oceans, and forests in the natural cycles that have unfolded for millions of years. Forests stretch farther, grasslands shift with rainfall, wetlands rise and fall with the pulse of rivers. The air is cooler, cleaner, free of soot and smoke, free of industrial gases. Seasons turn with the tilt of the planet, unperturbed by factories or engines. Extinction still comes, as it always has, but more slowly. Species vanish through natural pressures, climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, competition, predation. But the great wave of extinctions we set in motion, the loss of mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, ground sloths, passenger pigeons, whales hunted to the edge, does not arrive. Instead, the Ice Age megafauna linger. Picture herds of mammoths still moving across Eurasia, their tusks sweeping arcs through snow, their shaggy coats rippling in the wind. Mastodons browsing in North American forests, stripping bark and reshaping woodlands as elephants do in Africa today. Saber-toothed cats stalking plains, their fangs gleaming as they wait for the rush of prey. giant ground sloths rising to pull leaves from branches, their immense bulk reshaping South American ecosystems. These creatures, long gone in our timeline, endure for thousands, even tens of thousands of years longer. Their presence alters everything: the spread of forests, the composition of grasslands, the balance of predators and prey. Climate, too, continues its ancient cycles. The Holocene, though warm, is only an interlude. Over tens of thousands of years, ice sheets would begin to creep south again, glaciers thickening, advancing, grinding mountains into valleys, scouring plains. Then, after millennia of cold, the ice would retreat once more, giving way to warmth, forests, rivers. This rhythm of ice and thaw, glaciation and retreat, has repeated many times and would repeat again without us. Volcanoes still erupt, casting ash into skies, cooling climates for years at a time. Earthquakes still rupture the crust, reshaping coastlines, raising mountains. The continents continue their slow drift, an inch or two each year, imperceptible in a lifetime but immense across millions of years. Africa inches northward, closing the Mediterranean. Australia drifts toward Asia. The Atlantic Ocean widens. These movements need no witness. They are the planet's own breath, patient and endless. And in this Earth without us, the balance of climate is gentler. There is no sudden spike of carbon dioxide, no warming driven by coal or oil. There are no artificial accelerations of extinction, no forests cleared in vast sweeps, no rivers dammed into silence. The changes are slower, subtler, giving species more time to adapt, ecosystems more time to shift. Evolution, not industry, remains the shaper of life. Speculation invites us to wonder, in such a timeline, what new creatures might have arisen. Could mammoths, enduring longer, have evolved into new forms, smaller, more suited to shifting climates? Could saber-toothed cats have given rise to new predators, their fangs adapting into different shapes, their hunting strategies refined? Could giant sloths have diversified further, filling niches across forests and plains? And what of the oceans? Without whaling fleets, great whales might have flourished, their populations growing vast. Entire oceanic ecosystems could have been reshaped by their presence, for whales feed not only themselves but entire seas. Their iron-rich waste fertilizes plankton, which feed fish, which feed birds and mammals alike. A world of whales is a richer, fuller ocean. Even coral reefs might have lasted longer, unbleached by industrial warming. Their colors, their shapes, their labyrinthine passages would have sheltered countless species, evolving into ever more intricate webs of life. Without warming seas, without acidification, their decline would have been slower, less catastrophic. This is Earth's balance without us, slower, steadier, a planet that moves in cycles measured not in centuries but in tens of thousands of years. Each change is part of a rhythm, each extinction balanced by emergence, each ice age followed by thaw. Pause here and imagine yourself standing in that world. Snow crunches beneath your feet on a tundra where mammoths still graze. The air is colder, clearer. Above you, auroras ripple in silence. Around you, life continues in cycles unbroken, vast and unhurried. There are no smokestacks, no cities, no power lines, only Earth, whole and self-contained, unfolding as it has for eons. Perhaps this is the most haunting part of the thought. Without us, the Earth does not need saving. It does not require intervention, policy, technology. It is already whole, already balanced, already following its own immense story. Our absence is not its loss, it is only silence, only one fewer strand in the web. And so, from this thought, we turn naturally onward to consider not only the climate and geology of such a world, but the balance itself. What does it mean for a planet to remain in harmony, untouched by human hands. That is where we go next, into the idea of planetary balance, a cooler Earth ruled only by its natural cycles. When we step into the long corridors of time, we leave behind the span of centuries and even millennia. Here, the scale of human memory is too small to matter. What counts instead are cycles of continents rising and falling, oceans spilling and withdrawing, mountains worn away to nothing and then raised anew. It is in this realm of deep time that geology tells its story, and in this imagined world without us, that story unfolds without interruption, seamless and immense. In our reality, the Anthropocene has been proposed as a new epoch, one in which human industry and activity have marked the planet in unmistakable ways. Layers of plastics in the sediment, radioactive isotopes from nuclear detonations, sudden spikes of greenhouse gases, concrete and asphalt altering coastlines, extinctions arriving not over millennia but in mere centuries. These are our fingerprints, pressed into the geologic record like sudden scars. But in the absence of humanity, no such epoch would exist. There would be no Anthropocene at all. Instead, the Holocene would continue quietly, unbroken, just another interglacial in the long sweep of the Quaternary period. To a geologist millions of years in the future, the Holocene would look much like past interglacials, a thin, warm layer nestled between colder ones, pollen grains preserved in sediment telling the story of forests and grasslands, spreading, shrinking, and spreading again. And in that layering, would there be any hint of us? Perhaps, but faint. A flint blade buried in river gravel, a stone hand axe sealed in loess, a scatter of charcoal from an ancient fire pressed between soils. These traces might endure for tens of thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands. But over millions of years, the patience of the earth is relentless. Rivers cut through valleys, glaciers scrape landscapes bare, volcanoes bury everything in molten stone. What was once visible is hidden. What was once permanent is ground into dust. Think of the oceans rising and falling with glacial cycles. Coastlines drowned, then exposed, then drowned again. Entire continents reshaped, lowlands submerged, new land bridges exposed. Any village, any camp, any hearth left along these shifting margins would vanish, washed away, tumbled into the sea. The waves do not remember. The tides do not keep our secrets. Now imagine standing in the silence of a cave, tens of thousands of years after our disappearance. The cave still holds bones, mammoths, cave bears, dire wolves, and perhaps, in a corner, human remains. But without us to preserve them, to return and mark them, they too begin to crumble. Calcium leaches into the soil. Sediment buries them layer by layer. In time, even bone becomes indistinguishable from stone. There is a haunting possibility here that Earth might erase us almost entirely, not just our monuments, which crumble easily enough, but our very presence. In 1,000,000 years, no clear mark. In 10 million, no hint at all. The crust is always moving, always renewing. Ocean floors are pulled into trenches and melted back into magma. Mountains rise, then erode away. What once seemed indelible is lost in cycles that care nothing for memory. Pause for a moment and breathe into that thought. All that we are, all that we dreamed, every voice, every story erased as though it never was. The earth, whole again, unburdened by memory. And yet, perhaps not entirely, for some marks endure longer than others. Stone tools, shaped with deliberate edges, can outlast even mountains if they are carried deep into sediment. A hand axe from a vanished humanity might resurface millions of years later, carried upward by tectonic lift, exposed in eroded cliffs. To another intelligence, it might look like a natural shard, or perhaps like something more, a whisper of intention. Speculation invites us further. What if another species, long after us, arose with intelligence enough to study stone, perhaps corvid descendants, flightless but clever, pecking through riverbeds for curious shapes. Or aquatic minds, octopus descended, probing sediments in the shallows. Would they see in a chipped stone a sign of kinship? Would they wonder who had come before? Or would they dismiss it as chance, an accident of rock against rock? Geology itself offers no certainty. It does not preserve evenly, nor does it keep its archives complete. The fossil record is a palimpsest, a text written, erased, and written again. Dinosaurs, who reigned for over 150 million years, are known to us only in fragments, scattered bones pieced together across time. If such an empire can fade into dust, how much more fragile are the traces of a species that barely survived an ice age? Without us, then, the Earth moves forward into its own epochs. Another glacial maximum would come, grinding forests beneath ice, pressing new till into layers. Then another interglacial, forests spreading, grasslands sweeping wide, rivers carving new courses. The Holocene would not end in industry, but in ice, as countless interglacials have ended before. Our absence is not a pause, it is simply the continuation of Earth's rhythm, and in that rhythm there is something both humbling and liberating. For geology reminds us that permanence is not the measure of meaning. Even if we had left great monuments, pyramids, skyscrapers, satellites orbiting above, they too would vanish in time. The pyramids would crumble into sand, the skyscrapers collapse to dust, the satellites fall and burn in the atmosphere. Stone erodes, metal rusts. Nothing resists the patience of Earth forever. But in this imagined world, there are no pyramids to fall, no satellites to burn, no skyscrapers to collapse. The Earth is spared the work of erasure. It carries only its own record, its own story, uninterrupted. Now, take a moment to feel yourself in this timeline. The ground beneath you holds no human bones, no city foundations, no buried steel. It holds only the layers of climate, the cycles of ice and thaw, the traces of mammoths, lions, sloths. The air carries no memory of smoke, no trace of smog. The seas hold no plastic, no oil. It is a planet in which memory belongs only to geology itself, and geology forgets. And yet, there is always the possibility of discovery, for even one stone blade, even one fossilized footprint, even one preserved skeleton, could whisper to another intelligence that something once lived here, something that shaped and dreamed and then was gone. Would they call it a civilization? Would they give it a name? Or would they see it only as a flicker, a brief experiment that ended before it began? Perhaps they would weave it into myth, the story of a people of fire who lived for a short while and vanished, leaving behind only silence. Perhaps that is all we would be in such a world, a myth in stone, a faint echo erased and remembered at once, a people who might have been, but who were not. And so from this meditation, our path moves onward. For if Earth erases us so easily, what does that mean for the very idea of civilization? Is civilization necessary, or only one possible path? Is the wilderness poorer without us, or more whole? That is where we go next, into the philosophy of a world without us, and the measure of civilization itself. What then is civilization? Is it a necessity, an inevitable flowering of intelligence, or is it merely one possible branch of chance, fragile and fleeting? If we had never survived the Ice Age, never risen from our precarious beginnings, the question might never have been asked. And yet, in imagining the Earth without us, we are invited to see civilization not as destiny, but as accident. Perhaps humanity was just that, a cosmic accident. A flicker of self-awareness carried by a primate shaped for survival on African savannas, who learned fire and language, who built shelters against the cold. There was nothing certain about our rise. Every step was balanced on the edge of extinction. A drought here, a plague there, a population bottleneck that reduced our numbers to a few thousand souls. That we survived at all was improbable. That we built civilizations, improbable still. Without us, the Earth loses no law of physics, no principle of chemistry, no rhythm of biology. The planet continues whole. But something else is absent, something less tangible. For there are no voices, no languages spoken, no songs sung, no stories told. Picture the silence of such a world. Rivers flowing unmeasured, stars shining unnamed, forests spreading without being mapped. It is a silence rich with life, but devoid of narrative. The Earth holds no storytellers, and this raises the question, what meaning does the Earth hold without them? For meaning is not a property of mountains or seas, not something inherent in stone or water. Meaning is woven by minds, shaped by language, given weight by memory. Without us, or without any species like us, the Earth is not meaningless, but it is unstoried. Think of all the languages that never came to be. No cliques of Khoisan tongues, no Sanskrit, no Mandarin, no Latin. The silence of unspoken words is deeper than silence itself, for each word is a way of seeing, a way of carving the world into pieces, a way of binding reality to memory. Without us, all those possible languages remain unborn, like seeds never germinated. Think, too, of art that would never exist. No ochre handprints on cave walls, no figures carved from ivory, no flutes made from bird bone, no paintings of gods, no novels, no films. The silence of unwritten art is profound, a silence not only of words but of color, of sound, of form. The world remains beautiful, but beauty is not framed, not mirrored back, not shared. And songs that never rise, no lullabies sung by firelight, no chants echoing in temples, no symphonies swelling in great halls, no voices lifted in harmony. The silence of unsung songs is perhaps the most haunting of all, for music is the closest we come to speaking the unspeakable. Without us, the air carries only wind, water, and bird song, no human voice threading emotion into sound. Pause with me here. Listen, in your imagination, to that silence, a frozen steppe under auroras, a rainforest thick with insects and howler monkeys, a desert under starlight, all alive, all resonant with natural sound. Yet without us, none of it is reflected back into story, into symbol, into song. Does this mean Earth is poorer without us, or only different? That is the philosophical edge we must walk. Civilization has brought both wonders and devastations, pyramids and pollution, symphonies and extinctions, telescopes and weapons. To imagine a world without it is to imagine a world without both its beauty and its harm. Speculation can carry us further. Perhaps intelligence is not the goal of life at all. Perhaps it is not inevitable. Perhaps evolution cares nothing for story, only for survival. In that case, humanity was never destined, only possible. And if possible once, then possible again, perhaps not in us, but in another. And yet there is something uniquely haunting about the thought of a world without any story at all. For civilizations are more than cities, more than agriculture, more than invention. They are vessels of memory. They hold what otherwise vanishes. A song can outlast a season. A story can outlast a generation. A carved stone can outlast a lifetime. Civilization is the art of keeping memory alive against the erasures of time. Without it, time erases everything. This is why the absence of storytellers feels so heavy. The Earth continues, yes, but it continues without memory. Each dawn is new, each dusk forgotten. Each winter is endured, each spring unnoticed. The cycles turn, but they leave no trace. The earth without us is a world of presence without remembrance. Now, let us slow here and look at this from another angle. Perhaps the absence of story is not loss, but liberation. For with no memory, there is no grief. With no narrative, there is no burden of history. The earth does not ask, why? It does not regret. It does not long. It simply is. In that sense, our absence could be seen not as emptiness, but as a purer kind of fullness, a world alive in the present, unburdened by the past. This balance between presence and memory, silence and story, is at the heart of the philosophy of a world without us. If civilization had never taken root, if we had perished in the Ice Age, then the earth would still be here, whole. But it would be without the mirrors of meaning we hold up to it. No poetry to shape the stars, no mathematics to measure the seas, no philosophy to wonder at existence. Would the earth miss this? No, the earth does not miss. But would something ineffable be absent? Perhaps. For story is not only human invention, it is also the voice through which the universe knows itself. Without us, perhaps no such voice arises, and the universe remains silent, unreflecting, unknown. And so the philosophy of a world without us leads us to a quiet question, one without clear answer. Is civilization a gift to the earth? Or only to ourselves? Does the earth gain from being storied? Or is story only our way of making peace with impermanence? That question lingers and carries us naturally onward into the next meditation. For if civilization is not necessity but accident, then what measure do we give it? Is the earth healthier without it, or poorer without memory? That is where we travel next, into the measure of civilization itself, and the balance between nature and the absence of story. To measure civilization is to measure something both fragile and immense. On one hand, it is made of the smallest things, words carried on breath, gestures exchanged around a fire, seeds pressed into soil, pigments brushed onto stone. On the other, it towers across centuries, pyramids rising from deserts, libraries filled with memory, networks of roads and rivers binding entire continents together. Civilization is at once delicate and monumental, fleeting and enduring. But if we ask whether it was necessary, the answer is not clear. Evolution had no mandate that intelligence should bloom into culture. The mammoth survived without writing, the oak without mathematics, the wolf without agriculture. The ocean has never known cities, and yet it thrives with its own ecologies, older and richer than any human story. Civilization, in this light, appears not as destiny, but as detour, a path among countless others, walked only by one unlikely species. Now pause with me. Picture the earth without that path. Rivers without bridges, deserts without caravans, mountains without shrines. The Nile is not a cradle of kingdoms, but simply a river, spilling over its banks, flooding wetlands thick with reeds and birds. The Indus flows unmarked by seals or cities, carrying silt to the sea. The Tigris and Euphrates are no fertile crescent, but wandering waters through wild plains. In their silence, are they poorer, or are they whole? The measure of civilization depends on what weight we give to memory. Civilization is memory made, durable stories written, laws recorded, monuments built. It is a way of defying time, of resisting the erasure that geology demands. But the earth itself does not resist time. It yields to it. Ice advances, forests retreat, seas rise, mountains erode. From the earth's perspective, civilization is unnecessary, even alien. And yet, from within the human view, civilization feels inevitable, even essential. It is the lattice on which memory climbs. Without it, every story would vanish with the storyteller. Every song would end with the singer. Civilization catches these fleeting things and binds them together into something larger. It creates a continuity beyond the individual, beyond the generation. It is not survival alone, but survival of meaning. So which is greater, survival of species or survival of meaning? The wolf still runs through forests without monuments. The whale still sings in seas without history. They survive without needing to remember. Humanity chose differently, or perhaps stumbled differently. We chose to carry meaning forward. But this choice came with cost. For in preserving memory, civilization also preserved power, the power to reshape landscapes, to command resources, to dominate other species. Civilization carved terraces into mountains, drained swamps, felled forests, built empires. It lit the night with fire, then with electricity, then with the glow of cities seen from space. Each act of preservation carried its shadow, each monument built, a forest cut, each library written, a wilderness altered. So we must weigh civilization on both scales of meaning and of impact. Is the earth richer for pyramids, for art, for philosophy? Yes, in memory. Is the earth poorer for extinctions, for pollution, for wounds carved into its ecosystems? Yes, in life. Civilization is not simply progress, but paradox, beauty, and ruin interwoven. Now imagine Earth spared from that paradox. No empires to rise and fall, no roads to scar landscapes, no species driven to extinction by overhunting or industry. The bison still roam plains unbroken. The passenger pigeon still fills skies in uncountable numbers. The mammoth still grazes tundra. In that sense, the Earth is healthier without us, its ecosystems intact, its cycles unbroken. But is it poorer without memory, without story, without song, without reflection? Here lies the heart of the measure. For a world without civilization is a world without witness. The aurora still shines, but no one marvels. The stars still burn, but no one names them. The seasons still turn, but no one marks the solstice with fire. Without us, beauty is abundant but unrecognized. Meaning exists perhaps only in potential. It is tempting to think that the earth is better without us, cleaner, greener, wilder. But it is also tempting to think that the earth is lonelier without us, voiceless, unstoried, unremembered. Which temptation is true? Perhaps both. Perhaps the earth without civilization is both healthier and poorer, both freer and emptier. Pause again. Picture a great migration wildebeest moving across plains, rivers thundering with life. It is magnificent without us. But now, imagine a cave painter, thousands of years ago, capturing that migration on stone. In that act, something changed. The migration became memory. It became story. It was lifted out of time and preserved. Civilization is this act, repeated endlessly, lifting life out of silence and into remembrance. If we weigh civilization by the measure of life, then the earth thrives without it. If we weigh it by the measure of meaning, then the earth grows poorer without it. The scales tilt back and forth, never settling. Civilization is both necessity and accident, gift and burden. Perhaps the truest measure is not in absolutes, but in balance. Civilization is neither wholly good nor wholly destructive. It is an experiment, one path among many. If it had never existed, the earth would be whole. Because it did exist, the earth is also whole, but differently. The rivers carry cities along their banks. The forests hold absence where they once held trees. The skies hold satellites where once they held only stars. And so the measure of civilization may not be in whether it was necessary, but in what it revealed. For through civilization, the earth came to know itself through maps, through art, through science, through myth. Through us, the earth became self-aware, if only for a moment. And if that awareness vanishes, if civilization never was, the earth returns to silence. Not diminished, not wounded, but unmirrored. A world of presence without memory, beauty without story, cycles without reflection. That is the balance. That is the measure. and it leads us naturally onward into the next meditation. For if civilization was an accident, and if its measure is both gift and burden, then what of the futures that never were? The monuments unbuilt, the voices unsung, the dawns unseen. What poetry lies in those lost futures? That is where we travel next, into the poetry of civilizations that never came, and the echoes of futures unimagined. There is a strange beauty in imagining not only the worlds that were, but the ones that never came to be. To pause and lean into the silence of futures unborn is to listen for echoes that never sounded, to walk among monuments that were never raised, to hear the hush of voices that could have filled the air but did not. This is the poetry of lost futures, fragile, haunting, and profound. Picture, for a moment, the pyramids of Egypt. In our history, they stand against the desert sky, immense testaments to ambition and memory. But in the world where the Ice Age silenced us, the sands hold only dunes and stone. No pyramids pierce the horizon. The sun sets over a desert that carries no geometry but its own shifting shapes. What is absent is not merely stone, but the human longing those stones embodied, the desire to build something that endures. Now, picture the Parthenon. Its columns in our world are worn, broken, yet still standing as fragments of a story. In the imagined world without us, the hill of the Acropolis holds only rock and scrub. No marble was ever quarried, no chisel ever rang, no goddess ever enshrined. The silence here is thicker, for it is not the silence of ruin but of absence. And think of cities, Rome with its arches, Maya temples rising from jungle, the Great Wall stretching across mountains. Each one in our history was both monument and memory, each one carrying stories of triumph, labor, and longing. Without us, the rivers flow where Rome might have been. The jungle remains unbroken, where temples might have risen. The mountains stand bare without their wall. These absences are themselves a kind of architecture, a negative space where the outlines of what never came to be can be faintly traced. But perhaps most haunting of all are not the monuments, but the voices. Imagine a world where no philosopher ever asked what it means to be alive. No poet ever wrote of love or grief. No child ever sang a song into the dusk. Imagine a night sky under which no one wondered, why? In our history, every civilization is marked not only by stone but by sound chants in temples, markets filled with voices, songs carried across fields. But in this other history, there is only the wind, the cry of animals, the rustle of leaves. Voices never rise. The silence is total. And yet, in that silence, there is also possibility, for when we speak of lost futures, we speak of things never made real, and so they remain limitless in imagination. A pyramid unbuilt is not bound by stone. A song unsung is not bound by melody. They are infinite, untouched by time. In this sense, lost futures are not only absence, but pure potential futures that might have been anything because they were nothing. Take a moment to breathe into that paradox. A world without us is at once emptier and freer. Emptier because it lacks the voices, the monuments, the memory we brought. Freer because it remains unshaped, untouched, open to other paths. Speculation can take us deeper still. What other monuments might we have built had we survived differently? What philosophies might have blossomed? What sciences might have emerged? In imagining their absence, we also imagine their possibility. Perhaps civilizations might have asked questions we never thought to ask, built structures we never dreamed, sung songs we never conceived. By vanishing, we erase not only what was, but what might have been. And yet, the poetry of lost futures is not despair. It is a meditation on fragility. Civilization is not inevitable, not guaranteed. It is delicate, contingent, vulnerable to ice and famine and silence. To feel the weight of its absence is to feel the preciousness of its presence. Every story we tell, every monument we raise, every song we sing exists against the backdrop of its possible non-existence. That contrast is what gives them their radiance. Now let us return, for a moment, to the dark sky. Imagine yourself lying on tundra beneath auroras 20 years ago. In one timeline, humans endure, survive, and begin the long arc towards cities, art, and science. In another, they do not. The aurora still ripples. The stars still burn, the ice still glows faintly in the moonlight. But in that second timeline, no one is there to ask why. The universe shines, and it goes unanswered. That unanswered beauty is the essence of lost futures. The stars do not need us. The aurora does not wait for us. But we were here, and we asked, and we wove those questions into poems, myths, equations, songs. Without us, those questions never came. And so the universe remains, vast and silent, its wonders unreflected. This is the poetry of what never was. A desert without pyramids, a hill without columns, a jungle without temples, a sky without questions. The earth remains, whole and alive. But the layer of meaning that we once draped across it, that fragile film of culture, story, and art, is absent. And so, we linger in this silence, not to mourn, but to feel its weight. For only by imagining a world without our voices can we truly hear the echo of our own. Only by contemplating the absence of civilization can we glimpse its measure. From here, our thoughts move naturally onward. For if the poetry of lost futures is silence, then what comes after silence? If humanity never rose, never endured, could another intelligence take our place? Could the earth, patient as always, wait for a different dawn? That is where we turn next, into the possibility of other dawns, of other civilizations, of other voices rising where ours never did. If silence follows our absence, then the question becomes, how long would that silence last? Would it endure forever, or would the earth, patient and slow, eventually nurture another intelligence to rise in our place? The story of life is not linear, but branching. Across deep time, intelligence has appeared not once, but many times in many forms. Cephalopods with their alien minds, corvids with their cunning, elephants with their memory, whales with their songs. Even without us, the spark was not unique. It glimmered in other lineages, other experiments, other ways of being alive. If given millions of years, perhaps one of those sparks could catch and burn into the steady flame of civilization. Picture the Earth millions of years after the Ice Age swallowed humanity. The glaciers have retreated and advanced again. Forests have spread, collapsed, and spread once more. Seas have risen, fallen, risen again. Mountains have eroded to valleys, valleys uplifted into peaks. Through it all, life has endured, adapting, shifting, flowing into new shapes, and somewhere in that vast shifting, another dawn begins. Perhaps it comes from the sea. Dolphins, already capable of sophisticated communication, already self-aware, evolve further. Freed from human disturbance, their societies grow more complex. Over epochs, they learn to shape not tools of stone, but tools of sound, vibrations carried through water. Their civilization is not one of cities, but of currents, networks of song and echo, knowledge transmitted not on clay tablets, but through waves. Their monuments are not pyramids, but coordinated migrations, weaving patterns across oceans that become cultural maps. Imagine an Earth where the seas themselves are civilizations, living libraries of song. Or perhaps it comes from the land. Corvids, clever scavengers, thrive in the absence of human competition. Over generations, they refine their use of tools, pass knowledge along, and eventually form cultures as layered and intricate as any human society. Their cities are not of stone, but of nests woven into vast communal structures, spreading like organic cathedrals across forests and cliffs. Trade networks emerge, carried on wings, as objects of value move from region to region. A civilization of flight, built not on soil but in the open sky. Another dawn might belong to elephants, whose memory stretches across decades, whose empathy binds their herds in deep social ties. With time, their intelligence could bloom further. Imagine societies of elephants not bound to human-made reserves, but free to expand across continents, carving migratory routes that become like roads, watering holes that become like meeting grounds. Their knowledge, carried in oral traditions remembered across generations, could evolve into a kind of philosophy of place, a wisdom rooted not in monuments, but in continuity. An elephant civilization would not build pyramids, but it might carry stories across centuries, each herd a walking archive of Earth. And still, we cannot forget the ocean's other minds, the octopuses. Short-lived, but astonishing in their problem-solving, they might, in some possible timeline, extend their lifespans or evolve cooperative societies. Imagine coral reefs not only as habitats, but as canvases, reshaped by intelligent hands. Cities of coral, crafted and cultivated, luminous beneath the sea, a civilization hidden from the skies, yet thriving in its own alien beauty. The cycle of civilization, then, may not belong to humanity alone. Perhaps it is not even rare. Perhaps intelligence is a strategy like any other, one that life experiments with again and again, waiting for the right conditions to let it bloom. Our survival through the Ice Age might have been one roll of the dice. Had it gone another way, the Earth might have waited, patient, unhurried for a different role, a different storyteller. But here is where the vision becomes dreamlike. For these other dawns are not inevitable. Evolution does not seek intelligence, it seeks only survival. A dolphin need not invent philosophy to thrive. A raven need not write poetry to live. A whale need not map the stars to sing. The cycle of civilization may not repeat, or it may. The uncertainty itself is its own kind of wonder. Now pause with me here. Close your eyes, if you wish. Imagine the Earth not now, but millions of years from now. The continents shifted, the climate reshaped, the species altered. Perhaps there are no humans, no memory of humans, no trace of our brief flicker, but on some coast, under a rising sun, another creature lifts its gaze. Another mind begins to wonder, another voice begins to ask. Another dawn has come. And if so, what would that voice say? Would it ask the same questions we asked? Where did we come from? Why are we here? What lies beyond the stars? Or would it ask questions we cannot imagine, shaped by senses unlike ours, by perceptions alien to us? Would a dolphin philosopher dream of soundscapes we cannot hear? Would a raven poet write in winds and skies? Would an elephant sage remember in ways our short lives cannot fathom? The poetry of this different dawn lies not in certainty, but in possibility. The Earth may not need storytellers, but perhaps it waits for them nonetheless. Perhaps consciousness, in whatever form, is the universe's way of reflecting on itself, again and again, across eons and species. And so we are left with an image not of an Earth abandoned to silence forever, but of an Earth that waits, patient, enduring, timeless. An Earth that may, one day, welcome other storytellers. Another dawn, another civilization, another chance for the universe to hear its own voice. From here, our path moves gently to its close, for if humanity had ended in the Ice Age, the Earth would have carried on. But in imagining its silence, in imagining its different dawns, we come to feel the fragility of our own. Civilization is not inevitable. It is not guaranteed. It is a flicker, a chance, a narrow thread, and it is precious because of that. And so, we return, as we always must, to the central question: was our survival inevitable, or only a narrow chance? Could silence have claimed us, leaving the earth to wait for another dawn? That is where we will end, with a reflection on fragility, silence, and the haunting beauty of what might have been. When we look back across this imagined landscape, we see how narrow our survival truly was. In the depths of the Ice Age, the odds leaned heavily against us. Fire sputtering in the wind, food scarce across frozen plains, predators larger and stronger at every turn. A few wrong steps, a few colder winters, and the thread of humanity might have snapped. Civilization, with all its monuments and memories, would never have been. And so we are left with the weight of fragility. Our presence on this earth was never guaranteed. It was not destiny that lifted us out of the ice, but chance and persistence. A handful of sparks, a few small bands clinging to warmth and story. We walk today on the thinnest of survivals, one narrow thread among countless paths that might have ended differently. Was it inevitable, or was it only accident? Perhaps the earth could have carried on without us, untouched, its cycles unbroken, its skies unmeasured. Perhaps another intelligence would have risen millions of years later, in another form, under another dawn. We cannot know. What we can feel is the uncertainty and the wonder of having survived at all. So let us leave the question open, as it must remain, a reminder that civilization is not a certainty, but a fragile flame, easily extinguished. And that fragility makes it luminous. Now, picture the steppe once more. The ice stretching across the horizon, the aurora wavering above in green and violet light, the snow crunching underfoot, and then stillness. No firelight flickers, no voices rise. Only silence, vast and complete, where humanity might have been. And in that silence, the earth endures, waiting, patient, carrying its own stories in wind and stone and stars, whether or not we are here to tell them.